Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Very nice to have, and I would like to thank up front our selectmen from all three towns. This is not obviously a normal meeting, but we felt like it was a really important meeting to have to bring everybody together so everyone from all three towns understands what's going on, both with the regional agreement and also with the building projects. But before we get started, there's a lot of people here. So, in the event of an emergency, your exits are right there. You have two right there and two over there. If you need to use the facility at any time during this presentation, they're right down this hallway right there to your right. So I've done that. We're to code now. We're good to go. We're not breaking any rules. That's a good way to start. So the first thing we're going to talk about tonight, and this is kind of a brief thing, is just the regional agreement. So the regional agreement is not something, you have the three towns created this regional agreement, and the regional agreement is not something that the school committee or myself create. There's actually a finance directors, a finance advisory committee that gets together and is supposed to discuss this. It's supposed to discuss this review it every 3 years. When I came in July, I sat down, looked at it, and the last time it was reviewed was 2014. So it's a little bit past those 3 years. So we sat down, I sat down with the advisory, the finance directors from each of the towns, the town manager from West Newbury, with our business manager, and we just went over this, the regional agreement, to see if there were any things that needed to change. So we looked through it carefully. Typically these are well done, because people who went through understood not to put specific things in here. If you put specific things in here, it kind of traps you. If you put words in here that say like Mass General Law, if that law changes, then the contract's good, the agreement's still good. But on this agreement, there are several things that we were looking to do. And here's the process. I'm giving this now to all the selectmen. They've seen, most of them have seen this, but they're going to review it. We'll make any changes that need to be made, and then, oh, sorry, we're jumping ahead of ourselves. And then there'll be a vote. And that vote on the regional agreement will be April 29th. A couple interesting things about voting on a regional agreement. When it goes to that meeting on April 29th, there's nothing that can be changed at that time, because the meeting is held in all three towns at the same time, and the vote takes place at the same time. So the wording is what the wording is. But that April 29th meeting is also the meeting where the building project is discussed and voted on as well, for the first time. So in this packet, you'll see that there's a few things that we are looking to add. So I'm talking to folks up here, if you follow along. So one of the pieces that we're looking to add is regarding a contingency plan. So section 4, parts A and F. So section 4, you'll have there's a line here that talks about there shall not be less than one elementary school in each member town. Students in grade PK through 5 or 6 shall attend schools in their town's residence, except in cases of emergency, as defined by the Regional School District Committee. Children attending special ed low incidence classes, regional magnet classes, or inter-district school choice. So we're looking to add the language of, in such instances of emergency, refer to the Pentucket Regional School District Contingency Plan, as approved by the Pentucket Regional School Committee and as amended from time to time. So that language is in there because we want to make sure. We've had this happen last year at Page, and about 7 or 8 years ago at Donahue, we had those buildings had to be closed. The school district wants to make sure we keep good relationships with all three towns. So we want to make sure we have a plan in place. So if something happens to one of the schools, we know where the children are going to be going. And we want the towns to hold us accountable to make sure that we have that plan checked from time to time and share that plan from time to time. We know our demographics change. We know that numbers in schools change. So that's what we are proposing. And there's enough contingency plans. If you see a piece of paper right here, this is the draft of the contingency plan for as of right now. So that gives you an idea. It has both a short-term part to it and a long-term part to it. Next parts on here that we're looking at is section F. So if we do have to implement a contingency plan, we want to make sure that the towns have the ability to say, we don't like this, we need to stop this. So section F says, when necessary to implement due to an emergency as described in section 4B, the Pentucket Regional School District contingency plan will be in place for not more than 1 year or until all towns have convened a special town meeting for the purpose of reviewing any amendments as may be proposed to the regional agreement, whichever comes first. So that gives the school committee and the school district the ability to run this for a year, gives the towns that opportunity to review, find out how things are going with their constituents, and if we need to make changes to the regional agreement, the towns have that ability to say, we don't like this, let's get the finance group committee together and have them review the regional agreement. The next part on here is towards the end in section 12, as it pertains to both the budget and the composition. So it used to be, and my understanding is the language that looks to be struck from here is that the Finance Advisory Committee would be comprised of a selectman from each town, annually appointed by each member town board of selectmen, the finance director, or person holding such position by whichever title it may be known, from each member town, the regional district school committee chair or his or her designee, and the district superintendent and or business manager. We're looking to strike that. That's a very big group, and we believe this stems from when the Pentucket Regional School District was in receivership for financial reasons way back in the, I think it was early 2011s, somewhere around there. So in order to make sure everything was up to compliance, you had this much larger group. So we're looking to change that as well. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? In the last part, on the very last page, 14C says the agreement will be reviewed every 3 years by a group comprised of the chief financial officer of each town, the PRSD business manager, and the PRSD superintendent. So we'll have a representative from each town and from the school district. And then my favorite thing to add on documents is to know when the document was signed and last looked at. So the last page is simply just a signature page. If it gets approved by the voters, it's a signature page where you can also put the date. It's nice to have dated documents so you know when the document was last reviewed. Does anybody have any questions on that? Is it set in stone? Oh, for the contingency? No, so ideally, we've gone through and done a lot of thinking about whether this is, whether the changes are necessary. We think they are necessary, but we want you to have an opportunity to go back. And if there are any changes that you need to make, if you can communicate that through your town manager or your finance director, and we can get together quickly and make those adjustments, that'd be fine. We can hash that out. But I think we've gone over this pretty thoroughly, so the language should be pretty decent. But if there's something that's glaring that needs to be changed, the towns, it's up to the towns and the committee. So, since we're all here, can we make some suggestions tonight? Of course. Is that not appropriate? You absolutely. He wants to make. He wants to know if he can make some suggestions tonight.
I mean, just one that's glaring. Yeah. Yep. Just one that I thought off the top would be that last one when you said it'll be reviewed every 3 years by the chief financial officer and whatever you said.
Yep.
What about a suggestion of chief financial officer and or selectman's designee?
Sure, we can add that in. Oh, actually, let me check. Is Groveland okay with that?
Well, just so it's just not the chief financial officer every time, maybe
it could be someone else.
The selectman would be able to designate somebody if one town might not have one at that particular time, like we haven't. You know, we've made some switches in the last 5 years, so
yeah,
trying to think ahead.
I think that'd be fine. Now, of course, you walk around enough, you lose a clicker. That happens. Yeah, we'll go manual. So, any other suggestions, thoughts? All right. So we'll move on to the next, an exciting part, which I think is what most of you hear tonight, a building project update. So I'm going to front this with the following. My job as a superintendent is to advocate for the children of this district. That's my absolute purpose. So in terms of this building project, yes, I walked into this building project. And what I need everyone here to do is when you go to vote, I need you to know if you decide you're going to vote yes, what does that mean when you fill in yes? If you decide you're going to vote no, what does that mean if I vote no? That's my job. On behalf of the children, that is my job to make sure you understand what you're doing when you vote one way or the other. So tonight, I'm just going to provide you the information that we have. When we're done, you can ask all the questions that you want. Some of them might be questions we can't address here because it might be things that aren't pertinent to the conversation, but most of them we can, and I hope we address some of these things here. But I just want you to keep that in mind. Whatever you learn tonight, I have a Facebook account. Don't try to look me up, but I have a Facebook account. If you go on, I've gone on Facebook and I read all the town criers and I see amazing inaccuracies that get put out there. And it's part of it's my fault, right? Because it's a big project, it's a big topic, and there's so much details. And even for me, it's really hard to wrap my head around all of this, and I'm living this every single day. So I hope tonight gives you kind of an insight to the key parts of what's going on and where we are with things. So here we go. If we had the clicker, this would be so much easier. Where did I? So I'm going to pass this over to Jonathan Seymour. And Jonathan, we had a building committee, and Jonathan has chaired that building committee for the last several years. I'm going to kick this off with, we were in 2019. We're almost in February 2019. We started this process or received acceptance from the Mass School Building Authority in 2015. 4 years have gone by since we were accepted. So I'm going to pass this to Jonathan because I've only been here, or I've been back here now for just 6 months. Jonathan has been here, he's been here since 1997, so he can tell you all about the journey to this point.
Here's your clicker.
You stole it.
I was trying to give it to you for like 30 seconds.
Sorry.
All right, so thank you, Dr. B. So just going to kind of walk through this slide a little bit. It's kind of a funny title, right? Our journey to date, but it actually feels like it's been quite a long journey. Because here we are, and it's this, we're heading into the spring of 2019, and we received the acceptance of our statement of interest in the spring of 2015. So obviously there's a lot of process that goes into getting to this point, and I'm just going to walk through what some of those phases are. So it was really quite a big effort, and even to sort of get on the MSBA's radar and then get our statement of interest submitted and accepted. So we were really excited. And we've just been trying to keep that momentum up since we got accepted back in 2015. So step one is just submitting this statement of interest where you basically articulate all of the challenges that you're having with your facility. And so we did that. They seemed to like our proposal, and so they accepted us into the process, which was great. I got a little bit of feedback somewhere. I'm trying to get to a place where I'm not going to get that, so I'll just move around a little bit. So statement of interest was the first part. Then we entered what's called the eligibility period, and you have about 270 days to do a whole laundry list of paperwork documenting all kinds of different things, everything from a maintenance plan for your building, and one important part in the eligibility period is certifying the projected enrollment for the project. And so they do a long projection of looking into the demographics, and they come up with a number that this is what your project target enrollment is going to be, and then a lot of the square footage and different pieces rotate around that. So we went through eligibility pretty quickly, actually. We got through that in less than 270 days. We got accepted into the next phase of the project, and that's the feasibility study. And we're really just kind of wrapped up feasibility this fall and headed into the last, or the current part, which is called schematic design. So in feasibility, we formed the building committee, right? Many of those people are here tonight. Formed the building committee. We selected an owner's project manager. John Lemieux is here from Vertex. He is the owner's project manager. Then we went through the process of selecting an architect designer. So we have some folks from Doran Whittier, Brad, and Jason are here tonight. So after those folks were on board, then we started this process of really trying to figure out like where we're going to go with this project. So that started with visioning sessions. Many of you that are here tonight participated in some of those sessions where we invited parents and students and community members to come out and talk about what do we want for our education system, and then how does that translate into a building? How does a building then try to help you achieve that vision? So those were really exciting, and then turned from visioning sessions into actually some potential solutions. So we entered what's called the preliminary design proposal phase. And Doran Whittier put together about 10 different possible scenarios. Renovation, renovation addition, new construction high school, new construction middle high school, maybe out in the front of our site, maybe out behind the high school, maybe in a different part of the lot. So just trying to consider as many possible things that we could as potential solutions. So we go from the PDP phase into what's called PSR, where you take those many, and you kind of narrow them down, and then you look at a few in a little bit more detail, leading you eventually to select one of those that you're going to then design to a higher degree, okay? Hopefully it all makes sense. So you come up with a bunch of options, and we like these, and then you look at those a little bit more closely, and then you arrive at the one, the preferred option, right?
Mr. Seymour, sorry to interrupt, but I have a question.
Where are you?
Since I'm your boss, I can do this. But my question is, are you saying that when you say we selected, who's we? Who's we that selected that model?
That's a great question.
I want to make sure we clarify that.
Ultimately, the we was the building committee in conjunction with the school committee, but based on input from the community. So some of you in the room, again, were here this past summer. We met over at the high school and we laid out the last remaining number of options. We looked at the floor plan, the layout, estimated potential cost of these options, and we got some great feedback that night. We then, for a good week or so, got online feedback, and we took all that information, and it really led us to make the decision to select the new construction 7 to 12 option that we've been working with since then. So the two committees ultimately made that decision, but based on really strong opinion from folks who participated in that meeting and then responded to the surveys that the 7 to 12 knew was the preferred option.
So I thank you for that answer, and I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
So this 7 to 12 building, if we don't like this, can we go to the state now and say we just want to do a renovation, we just want to do a repair, we just want to do a high school?
No. The 7 to 12 new construction is the path that we're on, and so we submitted that to the state. They accepted that and moved us to the next phase, which is where we are right now. It's called schematic design. So you take that preferred option and then you design it to a higher degree than we've done with all the other options so far. This still isn't blueprints, but it's called schematic design. So it's a much more detailed look at the layouts, the relationship, what's in the room, those kind of things. And ultimately, what that's leading to is a better cost estimate of what that option would be. So we are, again, in the schematic design. Shortly, in about 2 weeks, the two committees will get back together again. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later in this presentation, but in February, the two committees will get back together, look at this schematic design package, submit that to the state, and then eventually the state will look at all that information, sign off on it hopefully, and then we'll know more accurately what the cost of the project will be. So it's been a journey from the work we did to get ready to submit that SOI, which we did 4 years ago, and now we are here with almost the schematic design finished, and that's going to be heading towards town meetings and votes come April and May. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. B.
Thank you very much. One thing I want to mention is I have to thank everyone that's on the building committee and the school committee. These are people who are volunteering all their time. They don't get paid anything additional. They do this because they care about their communities and they want to make sure that we do the right thing. So if you're a building committee member, thank you so much for that time. This is just a quick visual, and obviously you've discovered you have this in your packets. This is the timeline. So You can see 4 years ago is when we were accepted into the MSBA process. The last time we were accepted, so 4 years ago is 2015, the last time we were accepted was in the late 90s, and that was for the project that was coming up for a vote, I believe, in 2000. So fast forward through all that process that Jonathan just talked about, and you get to this summer where, as he said, the decision for the 712 building was approved, and in late October, the MSBA approved that selection. So that's the end of October. We are now in the end of January. Since that point in time, Doran Whittier has been frantically going through and going through schematic design, putting together some ideas of what the building might look like so that they can send it out to our construction manager, which we are very close to solidified. I have actually that contract on my desk. That just needs to be signed. And that construction manager and Doran Whittier, they put that out for an estimate again. So you have two independent groups that are going to go and do an estimate, and then they'll come back together. Now, it took me a while to understand this, so I hope this makes sense. There's been a number floating around of $155 million, and people are saying, well, okay, I'm going to be paying $1,000 a month based off that. So let me just explain this. That $155 million is based off of a concept. There is no finite details in that concept back when you voted on July. Now we get more and more details. 150 is probably in the ballpark, but it's hard to put a pinpoint exactly what it's going to be. A month from now, we will have much more accurate number as to what an actual estimate is, because they've designed more of the building of what it might look like. So that next number that comes out will be far more accurate. And you can see, so February 19th, that's when we get those estimates, and we submit on February 12th to the MSBA what our estimated price is. Yes, Mr. Kemper.
I'm not your boss, but you said $1,000 a month. It's actually a year.
Sorry, jeez. Yes, my mistake. My mistake. And we'll get to that number later, because, sorry, jeez. See, so, hey, yeah, no big deal. Yeah, that would be, but we'll get to those numbers later. I just want so again, on social media, you see these numbers bouncing around. Yeah, they might be a ballpark, but people are taking these absolute fact. They're not. There is some patience that you have to undergo to get to a more accurate number, and we're getting there, but we follow the process outlined by the state. So, oh geez, here we go. Really? Okay. It'll take a little while to warm up, but while it's there, I can keep on going. So, in April of this year, that's when the MSBA, so we'll submit to the MSBA our schematic design, and in April, they will come back and say, okay, this is how much we will pay and reimburse your project. And that's where we know for certain, okay, then we know about this is how much we're going to be responsible for. And the two critical dates here, the two voting dates, April 29th. That's the first date. That will be that's the town hall meeting, and that is people have to physically be present. It's a yay or nay, and it's 2/3 of the yays or nays. And then the following Monday is when it will be on the ballot. Now it has to pass both for it to be approved. So that's April 29th and May 6th. Put those right up in here. It doesn't matter if you vote yes or no. Put those up here and use your democratic rights to vote. So why are we where we are now? This is a fundamental question. We're talking about a building. Well, I'm in this middle of this process because I accepted the job. But why are we talking about a building? And that's something I had to go out and try to discover. So there's two big issues with the middle school and the high school. And we'll start with the structural, because that's the most, well, it's not the most. It is a very significant issue. So the high school was completed in 1956, and the middle school was 1967. So you have buildings that are 60 and 50 years old, respectively. And we know that in the high school infrastructure, we have issues. We have serious issues. And those are the main ones right there. We have the original HVAC is still running that building. The original electric is still running that building. You have original plumbing and the structures. Now, there was an addition done in 1993, and that also has its own issues. I'll give you a couple examples. We had, most of you saw it on Twitter, our main water line ruptured last week. Was it last week? It was last week, thank you. So that pipe was a cast iron pipe that was put there in the 1950s. And it ruptured on 113, 3 feet from Pentucket, so Groveland was responsible for that. Thank you. But 3 feet the other side, we're responsible for it. This is the 5th rupture of a main line on Pentucket's property, of those cast iron pipes. So this is not an anomaly. There was a rupture, and I heard about this, right? Because even while I've been gone, I keep in touch, but I heard about a sinkhole. My mother used to be the nurse in the high school, and I heard about the sinkhole that happened underneath her office. And what it was a water main burst underneath, everyone was gone, and it just started bubbling up, and sand was rushing all over the building, and it shut down the building for a good chunk of time. The building was floating on this water bubble until it popped and went all over the place and destroyed a lot of the classrooms. We had to go in and injected how many 18 feet of basically caulking. So you know the caulking you put around your window? 18 feet of caulking to secure the building. Not too many, I think it was 2 years after that on 113. If I'm remembering this is folklore, but I think there's truth to this as well. At 113, driving at 113, there was a police officer was just going down the street and ran over this bump that should not have been there because a water main ruptured right there. It was under our field somewhere, and that water main caused a big V in the middle of 113. It was in February, Super Bowl Sunday, I think it was, and it froze. So they called in, they went in there, and sure enough, ruptured the entire main. There were problems. That main stopped our water supply from West Newbury. There was so much damage we couldn't fix it without having it being a major problem. So Groveland was kind enough to let us, we had a way to tap into Groveland's water, and that's the main that burst last week. So we have these continuous issues with plumbing. So ultimately, we've repaired things along the way. I've heard these, the building's 1956. Why haven't we done a better job taking care of it? Yeah, so the state will tell you that any building should last 50 years. If you can get it to last 50 years, that's great. The systems are built to last 25 years. And I'm pulling this language from the independent report that Tochi and Associates did. 25 years is what these were built for. We have done a really good job of keeping things up to date. The crazy thing now is that at this point, we have to fabricate parts to fix the 1956 infrastructure. You can't go and call up and say, hey, I can't call Napa Auto Parts and say, hey, I need this piece. Can you get this for my 1956 Chevy? It doesn't exist. So we're fabricating things to keep it together. And you'll see, I mean, there's numerous pictures, there's videos, but it's certainly been a building. It's like a volcano. There's signals all along the way until something eventually goes amiss. The other thing to keep in mind is, yes, it's a 1956 building. It's a school. People are in it all the time. That building is used 17 hours a day during the school year, and on the weekends about 5 to 10 hours, depending on what it is, and all summer long. It's not a car, a 1956 car, or your house where there's only a small number of people coming in and out. Thousands of people are coming in and out every single day. That's a lot of wear and tear. Those systems are running all the time. So, although some people may think we've not done a good job taking care of it, I would disagree. I would say, and when I look at the 1993 section of the high school, that I have some concerns about how that was done. But then I look at behind the middle school, and I see that track and the fields, and I know those were built when we had Greg Hadd and Greg Lebrecht, and people who were paying attention to what's going on, people who were informed in what's taking place. It's not just someone throwing something up. And furthermore, in terms of the maintenance piece, the state is never going to invest in you unless you have a very detailed maintenance plan as to how you're going to take care of this facility. So we were required to submit that, and we did. So I'm going to turn now, those are the infrastructure issues. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Seymour, who's going to talk about the educational issues.
Thanks. So I was interviewed at the beginning of the school year by a student on our school newspaper, and they were sort of asking about the building project and asking, you know, what I thought about the building and all those kind of things. And I responded and I said, you know, this building has done a great job for our community for the last 60 plus years of giving us a place to educate, you know, our children. I think back to what it must have been like in the 1950s to not only try to have a building project, but also to really bring three communities together and to form a school system. And, you know, I think, you know, Pentucket Regional has done an amazing job. We built a building, it's lasted all this time. And, you know, we don't really try to use the building as an excuse like, oh, well, we don't have the right facility, so we can't really educate our children properly. I think that the staff do a really, really great job of educating children every single day. But the reality is, and this is the point of this slide, is you think about a purpose-built building. I talked a moment ago about, we had visioning sessions, we talked about what do we want our education to be like, and then how do we design a building that fits that vision, right? So when you look at the building that we're in right now, the vision for education was for a person to stand in front of a classroom and talk to a bunch of students, right? And that's reflected throughout the entire building. The classrooms are a little bit small, and they're really just designed for students in rows and a teacher to be in front, right? That was the model back in that time period. So we've evolved and we've changed. And while there's still direct instruction where a teacher would stand and talk, really it's more of an application-based learning environment where students are collaborating and they're solving problems. And so the space needs to adjust to that. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about the design that we've put together is that it's completely flexible and it allows for teachers to be able to kind of get down and work with students and let students work with each other with flexible spaces for learning. So these are some of the things that, you know, we kind of confront on a daily basis. Another piece is technology. So technology is ubiquitous for all of us all the time, and that's the case in our schools as well. But it does present a challenge because, again, the building was not built with any of this in mind. And so everything that we have technologically related is a retrofit or it's an add-on, and it just doesn't always work. All right? As good a job as the people who install the stuff is or the people who maintain it, it just doesn't always work really well because the infrastructure was not built that way. Wi-Fi and that internet signal just gets hung up a lot all throughout the building. The signals drop and it's really frustrating. So, you know, for students who want to use technology and for staff who we're always challenging them to incorporate this into your classroom, it's really frustrating when you plan for all that and you get in front of your group of kids and you do what Dr. B was doing, you're like, why is this not working, right? It happens all the time, and I know it's really frustrating for staff and for students. So it's a great opportunity as well for us to be able to bring the building from a technological point of view into the modern era. You know, another place that it's really, really evident is within our science rooms. And I think it's better maybe if Dr. B talks about this point because when he was last at the school, he was one of the science teachers. So you're kind of living in those labs. Sure. And those labs are exactly the same today as they were when you were there last.
Yeah, so I would have started in the middle school somewhere around 1986, 1987. There's a yearbook with me in it and entering into 7th grade when it was the junior high. So you 7th, 8th, and 9th. But it was interesting. The high school class that I took with Mr. Hutchins, BSCS biology it was the exact same classroom that existed in 1956. When I graduated from college, high school, then college, and came back to teach, is the exact same high school. 2000 came around, 1990, the building of 2000, where they were talking about the new high school possibility over in Merrimack. And I was sitting in Groveland, because I was a Groveland resident. I was in Groveland at the Bagnell. We were listening to a whole thing, and there was this gentleman who I very much respected came out to me and said, "Justin, you can't vote for this." I said, "Why?" He said, "Books, not bricks." I said, "Okay, but you've seen my classroom." And he said, "Yeah, they'll fix your classroom. Don't worry, they'll get the money, they'll fix the classroom." Okay, that was in 1999, 2000. When I came back in July, I walked into my old classroom. It is the exact same classroom. When you're doing dissections and things like that, I'm squeezing like I am between here. 2 people at a lab. That is not a collaborative thing. 2 people doing a dissection, 2 people working in a lab. And the places where it is designed for collaboration, in the new section of the wing, it is bolted into the ground. It's a hexagon. And in that hexagon is a sink with electrical, and I think there's some lab table space around it. Let me just put that in and say that again. A sink with electrical right next to each other. So I'm not sure where the plans came from. Look, I'll own this project. Like, I can tell you all about this project. I cannot explain what's happened in the past. I can't go back and fix what's been done. I can only move forward. The state requires a certain lab. In that lab today, there's a lot of the sinks are on the periphery, but everything's mobile because the state understands that the way building and learning happens is in a collaborative method now. When you're doing labs, it's not just 2 people behind the table. It's a lot of different discussion that takes place. So that, from an educational standpoint, was one glaring thing that stood out, especially because one of the things the MSBA had asked me to do was to go around and look at other schools. And when you go around and look at other schools, you see the opportunities those children have and the opportunities that our children do not. And again, my job is to advocate for the children. So those are the project cost estimates. This is just to put things into perspective. So we have all the files from the 99 project. So back then, it was not called the MSBA, it was called the School Building Assistance Program. Interestingly, if you look up the School Building Association or the MSBA on Wikipedia, you'll see that they were running about $10 billion in debt annually because they were funding at high percentages. So that converted over into the MSBA. But back in that year, 20 years ago, was when the high school, this was a high school only project that was proposed. The total estimate of the project was $36.8 million. The district share was only 28%. $10 million, $10.3 million. And then you can see the eligible cost, 72% was the MSBA, 72% of eligible costs. Much different now. So if you were to draw a graph, and my math teachers would be so proud of me right now, and pin 1999 on there with those dots of the cost of what it's going to cost you, taxpayers, the district, today, and put a dot from, 99, what it cost then, and then today, with what the cost is, you will see pretty much exponential growth. Why? Because there's inflation. There's about a 5% construction, anywhere from 3 to 7, but 5 is a safe 5% increase in construction cost, and the economy's good. So expecting that we're going to have 72% is not realistic. We're not going to get 72%. And expecting that we can build something for $36.8 million, yes, we could have back in 2000. But we are in 2019. We cannot do that now. And we are not building just a high school. We're building a 7 to 12 building that will take care of the next 50 years so we don't have to deal with it again. So why can't we fix things? This is a wonderful question. So people will say, hey, this is okay, the building's fine, let's just fix it. I love that building. That building has so many memories, so many stories. But there are certain laws that we have to follow. One of them is a 30% rule. So if you look at the Code of Massachusetts regulations, if we have to repair something that's 30% of a building's value or more, we can't do it without bringing everything else up to code. So first is the American Disabilities Act. We have to bring it up to accessibility. But then in that process, I believe there's a man in the audience named Mitch Croner who made this comment. It'd be like peeling back an onion. As soon as you start in fixing an HVAC pipe, which by the way, the plumbing in the HVAC runs through the concrete foundation. As soon as you do that, you're going to run into asbestos. And now you have to do that abatement. And you don't have to do it just there, you have to do it everywhere. So all of a sudden, that becomes a huge project. And we know, for the high school anyways, that just that repair to bring everything up is over $70 million. That is to get you the high school that you have now in 2019 dollars to bring everything up to code. So you can look at, if you look at the contingency plan, there's a whole bunch of them around. You can see each school is listed here. And it has what the building value is. Now that building value is not a number I make up. That building is from the town assessors who have gone through and used their formulas to calculate the building value, and that is approved by the Department of Revenue. They cannot mess around with the Department of Revenue, and these are accurate. So you can go through and you can see the building value and what the 30% value is. So at the high school, anything at $3.6 million triggers us that we cannot fix it, not without doing the entire building. At the middle school, anything that's at $1 million or more, we can't fix it. So when someone says, can't we just fix the HVAC system? No, we can't. And if a boiler went, it's not the issue that's the boiler, that's steam heat. Steam and metal piping creates, come on, I know I have former students here. You have corrosion. So that's going to eat away at the pipe. So even if you put a new boiler in, and I don't know that you could, but even if you did, it's just going to fall apart later. And it's not going to be much later because we know we're dealing with these problems right now. So why do the middle school as well? This is actually a great question.
Can you ask any questions during this?
When we're all done, is that all right? I'll finish, is that okay? Yeah, sorry. Write it down. Who's got a pen? Here. Yeah, so great. And actually, to answer that question, what I'm going to do is when we're done, if anyone up here wants to ask questions, if you could ask, and then we'll turn it over. Anyone here who's got questions to ask, that'd be fabulous. So this was actually a good question. I didn't quite understand this, and my understanding was the idea was not to do a 7 to 12 building initially. It was just to do a high school only. But the state said you need to go back and look at a 7 to 12 option. And when during the visioning sessions, what came about was, hey, this would actually help us because we know we're having issues with the middle school, and we know if we put these together, the middle school is already 50 years old. If we put these two things together, we won't have to deal with the middle school. It'll be more cost affordable to do it right now than to deal with the high school and then come back 10 years later and try to get the middle school taken care of. And we can put them into one building. And we also know if you have children that have been in the high school or middle school, the kids already are back and forth between the two buildings. High school kids are walking over to the middle school kids are walking over to the high school. It happened when I was in school, it's still happening today. So for all intents and purposes, those two schools are sharing, they share teachers and they share students all day long. So putting them into one building, it makes good sense, especially if it saves money in the long term. But again, those focus groups were the communities, they're the ones who came up with, that was the selection they wanted. The other big thing about this project is that it's intended to be a school building, obviously for our 7 to 12 students. But you also want to have all the different community groups being able to access it as well. If you're big in the arts, you have an arts program. Come on now. So when Jonathan talked about technology earlier, I arrived an hour and a half early and was having to deal with this. But it just switched on me? Oh, yeah. Selectman Wood, you're very intelligent. You must be a Pentucket graduate. Yeah. Okay, well, that seems to have died. Yeah. Well, we need this. You know what? Here. That's okay. I'll go through this. We'll get this up on the screen for you. But the overall idea here is that, so if you're big in the arts, we can hold big art events here now. Our current school is not set up for that. We know so I read all sorts of things, received some emails about the middle school had a band concert, and parking, people were parked all over the place. You had people sitting in aisles. It was just not a good situation. I was there. I was sweating and really super uncomfortable, and I felt really disappointed because that's not the experience I wanted to have for my community. I want my community to be there to celebrate their kids, to watch the students, to be proud of what's going on, and for the students to have pride in what's going on. And that's not the sense I walked away from. But I want also other communities, groups, to have access to that building. I mean, we can do continuing education for adults at the high school. We already have senior citizens and councils on aging that show up to the high school and they use it in adverse weather. They use that building to walk around. We want to use this for the same thing. It doesn't just have to be a building just for the children, grades 7 to 12. It can be a building for all of our towns. And it should be a building for all of our towns. All right, you know what, here. We're just going to take a quick break while I fire up a modern piece of machinery. Can you hand me my, oh, right there, Angus, sorry, grabbing my bag. What's that? All right, so what are you trying to do? Oh, so settings. All right, so this is why you do PowerPoints. Yeah, please. So I guess up to this point, the next part we're going to get into is what does this building look like, which is very challenging to do if your projector's not working. So let's stop now and just see, does anybody up here, while Selectman Wood is working away, does anybody here have any questions up to this point? Okay. Questions? Sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
said 30%. Now, how many years is that? Is that like 1 year or 5 years on the 30% of the valuation?
So the 30% is,
The valuation that you can spend for,
good question. So the 30% number is if the building, so the high school is $12.1 million is what it's assessed at. So 30% of that is $3.6 million. So they give you 3 years to be able to repair anything above that $3.6 million number.
so every 3 years you could put in for another modification to your...
Oh, sorry, no, you have to have, everything has to be completed. So if there's a failure, everything has to be completed within the 3 years, within 36 months.
So just to,
But I'm saying
to help you,
each phase, like the plumbing, for example, could you work on just the plumbing?
For 3 years?
Yeah.
so
Got-
if you,
Bring that up and then work on something.
Gotcha.
So-
I'm gonna go to the architects.
Prorate.
Sure.
so if you were to do repairs, whatever, you have 3 years to go and have that time period, that $3.6 million. After that, the clock starts to reset. So you can do up to $3.6 million and not have to go and hit those code triggers that we were talking about. But to the extent that you go over that, right, then you reset the clock every 3 years. Does that make sense?
Well, so if I understand right, every 3 years you could address different issues at the school, is that correct?
You could, but as soon as you bite, if we're talking about HVAC or something like that, you're going to be well over that right out of the gate. You know, it's like you can't parse out $3.6 million very easily when you think about the scope of the problems that you actually have.
Yeah, but couldn't you address this as far as, you know, taking it in a priority basis? What's the worst? And attack that?
You could.
And has any issues been thought of on the, like solar panels or something like this? If you were to, you know, like address the heating, could you look at solar panels at the same time, maybe upgrade the system?
We did. We actually look at the whole sustainability piece of this for the entire site, for the buildings, all of that gets packed, and we're planning on pursuing this project as a lead project. So it'll be a very sustainable project, and we're also, as part of that effort, we're getting an additional 2% of reimbursement from the state.
Yeah, but I'm talking about if you refurbish something, as you took it every 3 years, could you install the solar when you refurbish something? Could you
Sure.
install solar?
You could.
3 years, and then do the plumbing, 3 years, etc.
Yeah, you could, right? And you're just adding, if you brought in solar panels, you'd be adding towards that 3.6 million cap.
Yeah, but isn't there some kind of a rebate or something that, you know, the state or the federal government gives you for going green?
And that's the 2% that we're talking about, that the MSBA, on a project basis, that you would, if you pursue the entire project, they give you an additional 2%. As a repair,
That's all the reimbursement is 2%?
for the additional incentive points for the sustainability, if you did solar or a number of those types of measures. So that 52% that we're talking about, that's your base rate, and then you would be able to go and get additional incentive points on top of that, pursuing that as a green school.
Questions? Go ahead. Here, step up to the mic. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi. So in answer to you, I think I have an additional question to go on top of what you were saying. If we decided to go the repair route, we wouldn't get any reimbursement by the MSBA or whatever they're called? Is that true?
That is, at this point in time, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
That was a decision that was made back in, when the MSBA, when we decided the 712, and MSBA said, hey, we might actually do a reimbursement. We actually put that out to the community, and that once, you can only pick one thing. So based on community input, it was the 712 model. So the repair option, if something happens, we don't know that the MSBA is not going to come and say, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And even if they did, we'd be without a building. We've been 4 years now to get to where we are now. So we'd be going 4 years plus then the repairs. So we'd be out of the building for a good long time.
So just to be clear, so that repair piece, right, because we've moved forward in the process and we've selected, you know, the high school, middle school, not as a repair, but as a new construction, we can't go back on that now. Had we originally looked at going and doing a repair, we may have been eligible for some amount of MSBA reimbursement. And when we went through all of the options, we reflected that as part of the pricing for each one of those options.
Like now, we're 10, 20 years later, and we lost all that opportunity for the reimbursement that we had 20 years ago.
That's right. And when we also, you know, we were looking at that as a high school only and not really considering the middle school as well. That was kind of a future cost that we would have had to address later.
Oh, it is. So, and not to scare people, but when you said, we'll get more definite numbers next month, could it be more than the $150 million? And could the reimbursement be less than the 40%?
So if we go and that we submit to the state more than that, they are not going to like us. So that is unlikely. And the 40% is a guess. So the 40% later on, there's a slide that talks about eligible cost and ineligible cost. So the state only reimburses us for what are eligible expenses. I'll give you an example. The gym we have designed is much bigger than the gym we have now. We are reimbursed for, I think, 12,000 square feet. 12,000 square feet is reimbursable, but we're building a gym of 15,000 square feet. So 3,000 square feet is not reimbursable. The state's not, that's us on our own. The 12,000 feet, that's what's subject to the, it's 52.89%. So we use 40% to kind of look at that and say, okay, there's 15,000 square feet. So combined, on average, it'll be about 40%.
On just that one line item?
Yeah, and this sheet is it's called the 3011. Yeah, I'm learning a lot of things about it. It's called the 3011, but they go through all sorts of lines where they plug in, and the we submit it, the MSBA will review that, and they'll send back to us with the final actual cost. Yes, Mr. Kemper.
Hello. Just to go back on, just so people understand about putting solar panels on your house opposed to on a government building, you get tax credits for doing that. We don't pay taxes for that, property. So we would have to get into a partnership with somebody else and sell those tax credits to somebody else. So we don't, that's why the MSBA tries to get tries to make us more energy conscious, so they give us 2% off that if we meet certain thresholds. So it doesn't work like your house, so it's not the same. We would have to do that. And those incentives, which we were told, because we just had a meeting on Tuesday night about this, 2019 and 2020, those tax credits that the private people are seeing are going to start decreasing. So those aren't. It's a lot more complicated than doing something at your house. We don't get that, so we would have to sell those to like a private equity firm or something like that. And
yeah, I just wanted to clarify a little bit, or get a little clarification on what the gentleman was asking. And I think you were trying to be clear of that. As far as like piecemealing stuff, are you already aware that like the plumbing and the heating would be over the $3.6 million?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So that would just eliminate we'll do a small project. In 3 years later, we'll do another small project. We're already we're already in the threshold of we'd have to go to the $70 million.
Yeah. So the overall repair is 70.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you can bite off those $3.6 million bites, and in 10 years you can almost have half of it done.
Yeah, that was my understanding on it from what you were saying. But I think it was just we can do a small project. We can do a small project, and I don't think the words came out that the just to get in the plumbing, we're already over the 3.6, whatever it is, and that would force our hand into doing the $70 million, so it's a moot point. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Thank you.
We're designers. We're picture guys.
No, I don't know if that was understood. So I just wanted to hopefully clarify that.
So, sorry, question, do you have a question?
Thank you. I had also heard, I'd kind of like the audience to hear what would happen if we lost our accreditation and what that would mean for everyone with their yes or their no vote.
Sure, so accreditation has been a very fickle thing recently. No school or university wants to lose its accreditation. It's kind of the, it's a seal saying you're doing the right job. A lot of districts have moved away entirely from having accreditation because a lot of what accreditation can be accounted for is in state assessments. So you can see how schools are progressing, climate surveys, that's all included in state assessments. So they do not, a lot of districts just have gone away from accreditation altogether. It also costs districts a lot of money to have those groups come in, to house them, feed them, and pay for them to do all their time. So districts have been staying away from that, but yes, I think there'll be some school districts that might look at this and say, yeah, we do not want, or college, university, we do not want to take a student from a non-accredited school. Admissions counselors, they know about Pentucket. They know what the product Pentucket creates, so there's always, they know the caliber of student they're going to get. And when they're comparing things, whether it's accredited or not accredited, doesn't generally figure into their equation, but it could. It could have an impact. It's a good question. It's a very good question. Look at this. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question about this 30%, when you have to redo everything. You given a price like $12 million for the school?
Sure.
That's your property assessment. That's not the actual building value.
That's the building value. The property.
No, that's the property assessment.
No.
The price that the 30% is off the actual building value.
That's right.
This building you're standing in right here has a town property assessment of $4 million, yet they just had an actual assessment done on the property and it's over $12 million. No, it's an actual property assessment. I have the paperwork right there.
So just
What you're talking about in a tax assessment is not a property value. The 30% is off the property value. It's not going to be 12 million. It might be 20. It's not a heck of a lot more, but you're talking about the wrong number.
okay. Go ahead, Sorry. Go. So what I did, so when you get these numbers, what we did is we pulled up the actual card, the tax assessor's card where it says building value, and that's the number we use.
Town's version of what the building's worth, not the
That is-
actual building's worth. No. No, all right, so you said the middle school, you couldn't do anything over $1 million without making it code compliant, right?
So 1 point, whatever, 30% of whatever that million is, the value of the building.
You said the middle school was 1 million, right?
It's the 30% value of the middle school.
Said 1 million.
1.27 million.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
A couple years ago, 1.6 was spent on the roof and the boiler.
Okay.
Why isn't it code compliant?
I don't know what the value was a couple of years ago.
I don't know either.
Okay.
But you spent more. The property assessment is not an actual property value. They're two different things.
So again, we're pulling the tax card that says building value. And that's, and when you follow the code, it says 30% of the building value. That's in the CMR.
It says actual cash value. I have it right there.
Okay. Go ahead.
My point is, it's not 12 million. It's higher. Just like this building has a tax assessment of 4 million, yet they just had the property assessed at 12 million.
Appraised for insurance
Appraised.
purposes.
For actual cash value.
For insurance purposes.
For actual cash value.
Okay.
Okay. My next thing is,
Hey,
my next thing is when you show the old 2000 reimbursement, you make it a point to say 70%. but when you talk about our reimbursement, you don't make it a point to say 54.89%.
52.89.
Well, with your leads that you just got, it's 54.89.
It's coming on a slide.
Okay, but you make it a point to downplay to 40, like you better jump on it now because it's 40. Next year it's going to be 35, next year it's going to be 25. It's actually 54.89 is what this school is getting, and they could be getting more if they qualified for the maintenance programs.
So that is all correct. 52.89, 2% for the 54.89 for the lead, and you get a we estimate 1.5 for the facilities. But that's only for eligible expenses.
Correct. The same
big
is
chunk
up
of this
there.
is not
Up there you
eligible.
showed 70%.
That's absolutely right. That's true.
You show 70% of eligible, so you're like, you missed out on the 70, you're getting 40 now, don't let it become 20.
Okay,
It's
so
not-
I guess to your point, what you're saying was you're doing 70 versus 52.89.
Yeah, you're playing numbers.
Okay. So we would say it decreased. You would agree that it decreased, though?
Say what?
It's decreased drastically?
From 70 to 54.89.
Is that a significant
But you
decrease?
just said another 1.5 or something else.
Because that's what people are going to pay. So let's hear from Mr. Atwood. Yeah. Where we were and where we're heading.
Yes, it have. I got the paperwork right there.
The actual reimbursement, what they finally come back with, has not been. We'll get that back in the middle of April.
Yes, and if you want to spend more, they're going to let you spend more, but you already filled the paper out for $155 million. That's what it's going to be for the MSBA. They don't care because they're only covering like 90 million of it, right? Because that's all that's eligible to be reimbursed. So when the whole project comes out at 200 million, it doesn't matter.
No.
Because you're still only getting your same reimbursement.
So having been in the room with them, I assure you the MSBA definitely cares, and they critically go over this. If we submit something for $200 million, they will shut this down extremely quick.
Well, the only reason they're shutting it down is because they're afraid we're going to vote it down. And they wasted their time.
I appreciate your opinion. Mr. Atwood.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Atwood. I'm on the Board of Assessors for West Newbury, 17-year West Newbury resident, and before that, 22-year resident in Merrimack. We did have a question about the assessment of the building, the $12.1 million assessment. The Board of Assessors, we looked at 3 valuation methodologies that are used commonly in commercial buildings. I've used this before. I'm a chartered financial analyst in my role, in my day job. And out of the 2 of the 3 methodologies, the value of the building was 0. And the 3rd methodology was $10.2 million. Regarding the assessment, the methodology that any Board of Assessors uses is a very formulaic-driven methodology. If any of you have gone to ask for a valuation abatement, you know that there's very little leeway that the state provides. The state has approved the valuation of the high school building as well. Next year, that value will be less. So every year that we go by, there's going to be continued decrease in value of that building. Just on one of the methodologies, the value of the original building, it was built for $1.8 million, and we have it fully depreciated and valued at $360,000. And then most of the value is from the 93 edition. You might ask, well, what's the commercial value? What are you going to do with the high school building? And where are you going to put the sewage, by the way? Because I don't know if you folks know, but the sewage that was put in during the 93 project is only granted for school building purposes. You could never convert that, for example, to a residential building and sell it as condos. So it's very hard to say that the building's worth more than $12 million, but if you have any questions, we can talk offline about it.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the building, but before we move to the building project, I see Senator Tarr back here and Representative Mira. And I just wanted to thank them. None of you would know this, but I was sitting in the MSBA building. They were going through a vote. And what happens is we would have gone and met with them. We do a lot of back and forths. They say things that they want. And all these other towns were going before us. And they all had letters of support explaining what it was. And I was sitting there and I looked over to Mr. Adams and I said, Did we talk to them? But their staff was fabulous. They had letters of support for this project. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that support. It meant a lot. So I'll turn it over now to Mr. Dorr, and I will press the buttons for you as you go along through this. So what will this look like?
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about building, and we have some sense of what the building's going to be like, but really a really big part of this is the site. And when we think about the overall cost of a project, we like to talk about it in terms of building, but it's also about the site. And when you think about the site that we have on the high school, middle school campus, it's about 50 acres, which sounds like it's a lot. And it is a lot, but what we had to do is we had to figure out where can we put this on the site, because we have limitations like we have this area right in between. This is where the existing middle school is. This area right here is where the existing high school is. Everybody that's familiar with the site knows there's kind of like a big ravine in the middle with a stream that goes through it. So that's not a buildable area. We have this area all out front, which is all wetlands. We have this area that, the district has spent a lot of money in terms of putting in the new athletic fields, the tennis courts, and, the softball field. So we really had to look and say, where can we put this? And as was said earlier, we looked at a number of locations. We looked at putting, this is what is signifying the new school, in behind the existing school where the baseball and football fields are. We also looked at putting it out front. And until relatively recently, there wasn't an opportunity to put this field out there because we had the house, which ultimately the district acquired. So that gave us a little bit more flexibility in being able to put the baseball field in this location. This is being proposed as the new artificial turf field, district offices, and then this is parking that would be about the same number of parking spots that we're currently working with today, in the plus or minus 400 range. And the location of that actually will be able to service events at the baseball field, more or less at the artificial turf field here, and then obviously out for the high school. So when we talk about building, there is the building, but there's also the site, and there's a lot of cost associated with having to put that site together. Grading, roadways, access points in terms of walkways, drainage, all those types of things. And so now we'll talk a little bit about how Jason will talk a little bit about how the building is laid out, and then we'll get into maybe what the building looks like. Just also keep in mind that while we have done a tremendous amount of work to be able to go and understand programmatically how the building comes together, how the site works, we're overall on a design basis, we're probably about 15 to 20%. So the way that the MSBA process works is we go through schematic design, which we're just wrapping up now. We're going to be doing a couple of estimates, reconciling those. But ultimately, if this goes through and is successful at town meeting and at the ballot, then we would actually in earnest start doing the rest of the design process, which is about almost a year. And then after that, then we would actually start going and doing the construction process. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Jason, and you can talk about the layout.
Thanks, Brad. So I quickly wanted to review the floor plans with everyone to give you a sense of where the major pieces and parts are. And just to orient you in this diagram, it's in the same orientation as the site plan. So the existing building is over here on the right. Route 113 is even further to the right. The Merrimack River is to the left, and the middle school building is off the page to the bottom. So what we're proposing is a 3-story building that contains all grades 7 through 12 with 2 entries. What is essentially a high school entry and a middle school entry with administration right between those 2 front doors. On the first floor, and in general, high school elements are to the north and middle school elements are to the south. So you see high school classrooms here in blue. The green represents the dining commons. It's a connective tissue between the 2 halves. Red is fine and performing arts, so the new auditorium would be right there at the center of that fine and performing arts area with music and art nearby. On the south side, on the first floor, is all of the health and PE spaces. This is the 15,000 square foot gymnasium that Dr. Bartholomew referenced earlier, locker rooms on this side, and then PE instructional spaces on the north side of the corridor in that wing. We have this generous forecourt out in front and a courtyard, three-sided courtyard in the back that are meant to serve as outdoor learning spaces. Oop, this doesn't change for me. On the second floor, again, we see that we have high school classrooms in blue upstairs. We're proposing a balcony in the auditorium. This is guidance right between the two halves of the project, with the library also as one of the shared spaces between the middle school and high school portion, and then middle school classrooms on the south side of the project. So one of the things we heard from the very beginning was this idea of separating middle school instructional spaces and high school instructional spaces. And of the 10 options that we explored, this is one of the options that performed the best in that criteria, and that's what we're trying to highlight here. And then finally, on the third floor, we see the same thing. The rest of the high school instructional spaces and the remainder of the middle school spaces on the south side. One of the things that this proposed project does related to education, particularly at the middle school level, because it's on 2 levels and we have 2 grade levels, there's an opportunity to organize the middle school side by grade level team. That's something that the existing middle school doesn't do very well, and one of the educational issues we were trying to solve as part of this project.
So this, again, at this level of design, this is a rendering of the building on how we think, based on the floor plans that Jason just described, the massing of the building ultimately, and then a lot of discussion in terms of what we've had both with the user groups as well as a lot of discussion and focus with Greg and his team. A lot of emphasis placed on durability of this building in terms of the materials that we're using, the sustainability factor in terms of how the building is oriented on the site. And then one of the things that we really focus a lot on these days is the safety of the building. And the safety of the building really starts all the way out when we enter the site and we start talking about things like entry sequence, how we approach the site, how we approach the building, and then security measures that we take actually within the building. So as Jason was saying, this is shown as a 3-floor academic wing on the high school. There's a connection piece in between here that in the background is the media center on the 2nd floor. There's a dining commons, which is kind of one of the hallmarks of the discussions that we've been having with the user groups, and we have some imagery that we'll show you here in a minute. This is the gymnasium at the front of the building, and in the back there is the middle school academic wing. And one of the things that we look to in terms of putting this together is not just the separation between the middle school and the high school, but also from a safety perspective, how can we zone the building so that in off-hours use, we're able to kind of lock down sections of the building so we don't have to have the public going through there. If we have a gymnasium event, we can kind of contain that. Similarly, if we have an event that's going on in the dining commons or the public spaces, we kind of keep those, as separate zones within the building. This is just a little bit closer look. It gives you a sense of scale. This is a big building. This is about 210,000 square feet, consistent with all of the programming effort that went through. So this will, in terms of the height of this building, this is about 45 to 48 feet in that range. So it'll be the largest building in West Newbury, no doubt about that. This is the rendering, an interior perspective of the dining commons, which is that connection piece. And one of the things that we're really trying to achieve as part of the design of this building, and it's a hallmark, is the flexibility of space. We're really trying to get more out of space than just a traditional cafeteria. If you've been to the high school cafeteria, it's old school. We've got a lot of tables in there. Everybody sits in the row on the tables. Here, the idea is to be able to transform the space not into a dining area, but to have that furniture, which can be packed up, moved away, some types of flexible furniture, so that if we want to go and do a band ensemble in there or a jazz ensemble, that's something that we can do there. If we need to have public meetings, we can have public meetings in there. It's adjacent to the servery, the auditorium. All those types of spaces are connected, that connective tissue that Jason was speaking to. Finally, what we've done is we've just tried to give you here a sense of where we are at the existing facility and then looking at new facilities that have been more recently done. Some of them in the area, some of these are our work, our firm's work, some of them are other firms' work, but these are all representative of MSBA projects. So on the left side, that's familiar to most of us. You can see, you know, there's some old seating in there, there's some new seating which has been added, but from a kind of a more modern theater space, there's a lot of things, if you talk to the theater people, that aren't included here that we try to be achieving in something more like this. Art, you can see, you know, again, we're using, these used to be shop spaces that have been converted into art. This is actually the Winthrop School that many people from the building committee and from the administration went and visited. And I think the images speak for themselves in terms of, you know, new modern versus what's currently in place. Here's physics. Physics, all the way original equipment in a lot of these science labs. Again, you know, here we're working with the MSBA program for science lab spaces. You can see all the furniture here is flexible, can be moved around, more conducive to a collaborative learning environment.
And just, I mentioned this earlier, but the, the picture on the left, that is the 1956 setup. To the left of that space is the teaching part of the classroom, and then back there is the lab. So if you went to Pentucket, you took physics, you took it in this space. On the right, you'll notice all that is movable. Everything on the right gets moved because that's the way education takes place. It's flexible and it's collaborative.
So here we have some athletic training, you know, that's going on, some Cybex units that are in the hallway. I actually took these pictures today, so they're fresh. And these, you know, this is representative of, you know, athletic training, kinesiology lab that we have here, which is not just, it's not just a gym workout space, it's something that's actually integrated into, you know, the health program. So there's an educational piece that's going to this, along with the training aspect as well.
So thank you, Jason and Brad, for that. So the next ultimate question is, so what is this project? What does this cost me? And there's a lot of variables that go into this. So the big variables is, one, what is the district share of the project? We keep floating out the $155 million. The district does not pay $155 million. The district's still responsible for a large percentage of the large chunk of that. It's 95.2 is what it's at, and that's, again, that is the number in July. So 95.2 is what the district share is. So once we nail down, that's one component. The next component, what's the interest rate and what are the terms of the loan? Is it a 30-year? We assume 30-year at 5%. Today, we know that we could get better than 5%. But we assumed 30 years and 5% because we did not want to tell you, oh, it's going to be $500 a year, and then all of a sudden we go through and it's $900 a year. We did not want to put any of the taxpayers in that position. So we assume the worst case scenario. We don't know what's going to happen, so we assumed 5% and we assumed 30 years. It also depends on what town you live in. Each town has a different tax rate. You have the number of the students that are in your town. That impacts the percentage that gets paid, and that is dynamic from year to year. And then, of course, your property value. So those are the factors that determine what ends up getting paid. So what's the total cost? So the estimate of $155.4 million, that was based on that general information design. That's the process I told you before. It was, we know this is the structure, that H shape, and then an estimator comes in and says, okay, to make that H shape, we're going to put in this formula. They did not have in designs. We didn't have any designs done up by that point. So that 155.4 is an estimate. So at this point now, we're in schematic design, and this is where I said earlier, we'll get more and more detail. And those two estimates that will come in within a month from now will nail down a little more accurately what the cost will be. So we just talked about, while the screen was down, we talked about eligible expenses and ineligible expenses. So the MSBA only reimburses for what's eligible. And there's that sheet, it's a 3011, and on the sheet, they list out what they will reimburse. And our rate is 52.89 for eligible expenses. So when on that assumption, what we spoke to with the gentleman earlier, we said 40% because we're taking into consideration, we're not going to build a building that's just eligible expenses. If we did, our students and our community would not be very happy because it would not fit the needs of what we heard from the vision groups of what they felt like they needed for a school. So we know there's going to be parts of the building that are not eligible for MSBA reimbursement. So we assume the 40%. So when will we know? So February 12th is when the joint school committee and building committee will come together. They'll look at those estimates, and that will get submitted with schematic design to the MSBA. So after that, we'll be able to go through and do some calculations to get a more accurate cost of what the actual building project will be. So the MSBA, if they approve, they will give us a detailed list of what's eligible, what's ineligible, and our total, what the district share would be, and what their share will be, and that's about mid-April. So our goal, again, superintendent of schools, my job is to advocate for the children, and is to do it in a fiscally responsible way. Our goal is to make sure that if this building moves forward, that we do it responsibly, that we build a structure that is designed to meet the needs of our students today and tomorrow. We don't know what tomorrow will hold, but we want to make sure it's done correctly, so we don't have to go and build another middle school or a high school for 50 more years. That's the goal. You do something, if you're gonna do it right, do it correctly. And also, you can do that in making sure it's affordable. We're not proposing that we put the side of the building in sheets of gold. We are strongly advocating, and Brad would tell you, Greg and I, and Greg Lebrecht and Jonathan, are probably one of the biggest pains in his side, because I really like brick. Do you know why I like brick? It lasts a long time and it's cheap. So I really like brick. So you'll see, and that came out from the community, you'll see when they do their whole illustrations, there's a lot of brick in there, because we want to make sure we have a sustainable building that's affordable and will last for the duration. And of course, as we get towards the end, it dies. It's okay. Look at this. Mr. Breen, thank you so much. So, will this come back on? It will in 1 minute. Because these next two slides are important. Well, while this, okay, yeah. Questions at this time? Who wants to line up for some questions? Go ahead, hop up. Is the green light on?
I happen to be one of the assessors in Merrimack, and I totally agree with Mr. Atwood said. The values they're using are the building values, not the total value of counting land. But I would say this, think about it this way. I've been in town for a long time. Not as long as some of the people that grew up in this town, but a long time. And over the years, the Pentucket district has really not been, they've been too thrifty. They have put Band-Aids on a lot of things. Now, I admit, $70 million to renovate the building is a lot of money, but you're getting nothing back from the state. So instead of looking at the project at 155 and we're paying 95, what I think everybody should look at is, it's $70 million, you're really putting a Band-Aid on the project again. Really, you're not doing it, you're not bringing this school district into the 21st century. And if you ride around, and I'm around the district, I ride around every place, look at every school in the KPN League. They got brand new schools, top of the line. They're giving their students the best opportunity possible. Pentucket does do a great job of educating the kids. It's a highly thought of educational system. So the way I look at it is, I put a Band-Aid on for 70 million. I spend 155 million. So I got to spend another 25 million. But the state's given me 60 million. So really, of the additional money to bring it into the 21st century, the state has given you 75% of the additional money. Yes, 95 million is a lot of money, but I got to tell you, it's about time this district spent it.
So I just, point of clarification, how likely is the HVAC to fail in the next 5 to 8 years? Does anyone have any idea?
So, sure. So impossible to give a definitive answer.
Yeah.
But we know there was, so as I said, when I'm going through all this paperwork and you review, there's an independent evaluator that comes through and looks at all the systems. And their exact verbiage was imminent failure. That it had lasted out, and that was for the HVAC, the mechanical, and the plumbing. The one nice thing that came out of their report, sorry, that report, yes, that's a good point. That report was 2015. That was February 2015. So the nice thing about their report was they did say that the buildings had good lighting. So that was one of the props that they gave at the end of the report. And that report is actually, we'll get to this, the website, how you can learn more information. But there's a whole report. You have to go through a bunch of it, but it is in the statement of interest.
Okay.
What's that? Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So my follow-up to that, and I'm sorry about the feedback. So if it fails, and our vote fails, and the building becomes unoccupiable, and we have to go to this long-term contingency plan where kids are redistricted. Oh, okay.
Yes.
This isn't a question for you necessarily as much as for the assessors and the finance people in the room. What happens to our property values if we become a community without a high school? What happens to the tanking of the property values and then the associated tax revenue that we are then unable to collect, and it trickles out to all of our departments, not just our educational facilities. So anyway, it's my question of the night.
So, sir, go ahead. You're good, you're on.
More of an education question, and that is there data that shows student performance versus facility building age, and can it be a project like this somewhat justified by saying, a newer facility that our students can do members of data actually? Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, there's more and more literature all the time coming out about the actual impact that a building can have on student performance. The most recent study came out of the UK by a guy named Dr. Barrett, and what he indicated in his research is that the building can be as much as 16% attributable. The student performance 16% of the student performance is attributable directly to the building itself. And so that's a fairly significant percentage when you think about all of the factors that go into a student's educational experience. There have been other studies over the years about specific factors like indoor air quality, daylighting, temperature control, access to the outside, access to views. But yes, the building does matter, and there is literature out there to support that.
Okay, so that question had come up of what happens if the building project vote does not pass. So if that happens, we're going to keep doing our jobs. I cannot emphasize this point enough. I love this community. You all know I grew up here. You all know I went to school here. I am not going to abandon this community. If this does not pass and times get tough, you need someone who's going to stand by. I'll throw everybody on my shoulders and say, let's go. We'll do what we can. We will remain in the buildings. We'll do what we can as long as possible. So when we have a catastrophic failure, we'll go to the contingency plan, and we will follow that contingency plan. In the event of the high school, that means the high school would shift over to the middle school, and in the short term, the middle school would go down to the elementary. So each elementary would become a K-8 for the short term. In the long term, we have to go through and have those conversations a little bit more. There's a plan in there. We talk about regionalizing in putting the middle school back together at one of the buildings. And during that time period, when that's in place, the towns then have to decide, what do we want to do? This would have to go up for a vote, just like the buildings, the repairs would have to go up for a vote. And if it's a vote to repair, in July 2018 money, that was the estimate, $73.2 million. That was July 2013 money. So at that point, the towns would have to decide, do we want to go ahead and repair that and start peeling back the onion? And if that's the case, we now still have to stay in the long-term plan, and the repairs would have to be done over time. But we own that. This is not an MSBA project. And again, there's a potential we could enter into an MSBA project, but that building would not be occupiable while we go through that 4-year process, or however long that process might be. So if the repair vote does not go through, so let's say school building does not, the school building project, the 712 project does not get approved, catastrophic failure happens, and the repair vote does not go through, then that building is closed and shut down. And we will have to figure out what we're doing. The long term would be, again, the middle school would become the high school, and we go from there. I would just, in the back of your minds, that's one building now. The middle school would be another issue, because now you have 750 students this year will be rolling through that every single day, and you've shrunk down your facilities quite a bit. So how will we know what's going on? Well, so we do watch for communication. We'll try to put out as much communication as we can. We'll do it through emails, videos, tweets, and the website. We're really honestly waiting for the end of this month, because we want to have that estimate number, the new estimate, to kind of put out more accurate and updated information. And right here, that bullet point, starting the end of February, I'm on board. If there's a community event going on, Board of Selectmen meeting, I am happy to show up and give the information that I know about the project. If you belong to the garden club, COA, invite me. Ms. Naff is right there. She yells at me all the time that I can't do these things because I have no time to do it, but she will make it happen. Even if you have a thing going on in your home, I'm allergic to cats, so please, cats. But you have a big group, 15, 20 people that are going to show up, I'm happy to show up and just talk to you. At the end of the day, that bottom line is the most important thing. I want to sleep with a good conscience. If you decide to vote no on this, I just want to make sure you understand what the implications are of that no vote. If you decide to vote yes on this, I want you to understand what the implications are of voting yes on this. And that's my job, to make sure you're informed. And that's why I'm so thankful for everybody here tonight for being here, so we can share this information, because we need to have informed people going to the ballots, making the decision that they think is appropriate. I'm not going to tell you which way to vote. That's not my business. My business is just to advocate for the children and understand that you have the factual information. Yes, Mr. Dunn.
So my question to you would be, to the committee, is in 2000 it was 3.6 million. Today it's 155 million. What's going to happen when this thing's done in another 4 years down the road? That 155 could grow by 20%. No project has ever come in on budget that I've ever worked on. And have you guys built money into this project to cover that?
I believe we built in 7.2%. Is that correct?
So we have contingencies in there. There's a number of different contingencies, but the ones that are applicable, Bill, that you're talking about, is we have about 8% of contingency built into the job to cover things. There are going to be things that we're not going to be able to, see up front. And so that's why we have those contingencies.
To the taxpayers down the road, the project in 4 years went over by X amount of dollars, we're looking for more money. As a selectman, that's not something I would want to have to do.
Understood. And so there are some things that we can control, there's some things that we can't control, right? We can't control market. But even as a stopgap measure there, and we actually spoke about this today, is that there's a process, we call it the alternate process, that we go through and we identify areas where we could have value engineering or cost-saving measures that could be put into place that if on bid day, right, the numbers come in, because they're estimates at this point, but we will be locked and loaded with the MSBA. One thing is for sure, is when we go through and the MSBA approves this project, or hopefully approves this project, they lock in their number and it doesn't change, regardless of what happens, whether the price goes up or down. Actually, only if it goes up. If it goes down, we're giving them something back. But, you know, we have these opportunities to go and say, if we change this, we could save X dollars. And so, if we get to that point, and it's clearly our intent not to, but that's a decision and an opportunity that we have to make.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Adams. And if anybody has questions, hop up to the mic.
One point of interest, I want to clarify, if I get my facts straight. Back 4 years ago in the statement of interest that we put in, I think you remember we're one of 19 communities that was accepted by the MSBA. There was 96 applicants. In other words, about 1 out of 5 get accepted to the program. This particular agency didn't exist 20 years ago. So, worst case scenario, we're going to add 4 to 6 years on top of the problem. And are we going to be 1 in 5 schools get accepted down the road again when they frown upon the fact that we didn't accept it? And then is the MSBA still going to exist?
So just to, this is good information. So the MSBA, again, I am very grateful to the MSBA for them to give us this opportunity. They are investing in us. That said, if we have applied, historically we have applied, I think nearly every single year, trying to get our buildings repaired. And this is the first time we've been accepted since that 1999 application. So that's 16 years. The likelihood of us going through, failing a vote, and being allowed back in the MSBA within 3 or 4 years is highly unlikely, though you never know what the circumstances are. That's up to them. But again, they want to know that our community's behind it. And if we've failed them in 99 and again in 2019, then I mean, that's up to them. Who would like to go first? We play rock, scissors, paper.
All right, thank you. My name is Bill Backrack. I'm a commissioner of the Parks and Rec Department in the town of West Newbury. First, I want to thank you guys who've done a great job in terms of sharing what's going to be going forward and where we're at. I do want to say I did have 2 sons go through Pentucket High School, and they did fabulous, so thank you very much to the teachers as well as anyone else involved in that. What I do want to talk about is the understanding of the fields, and how do you see those fields, not tonight, because I understand you're still in the schematic stage, but what does it look like in terms of a layout? And the reason I'm asking that question is that the town of the Parks and Rec Department in fall went forward to the town of West Newbury in the town meeting to add an additional multi-purpose field. And unfortunately, it was voted down for a variety of different reasons. Currently, we have the soccer and the lacrosse teams at Pentucket High School. We have 4 fields at Pipestave, of which 100% are utilized by the Pentucket High School team on 3 of those fields, both soccer and lacrosse, in the spring and in the fall, and in the spring it's 75%. One of the things that we're finding, especially in our youth, we're now constraining our youth sports and the amount of youth sports we can add in Pentucket youth, specifically in the areas where they're expanding, which is in the multi-purpose fields, not necessarily in baseball, right? So you're talking soccer, lacrosse, and the biggest one that we've got to jump is in flag football, which we didn't have that 4 years ago, and now flag football has 450 or 500 participants, and we're trying to expand now into 8th grade. And what you're going to see, and probably in our lifetime in 10 years, you're going to see flag football being a high school sport as well. So my comment is, throughout this entire process, when do you think you might be able to have a better understanding of the fields, whether those fields can handle all the Pentucket athletics? because that will, as you know, affect the cost of what you're going to be presenting. And I don't expect an answer tonight, and probably not expect an answer for a while, but would love to get the feedback, because if it turns out that you need more fields and continue to use pipe stay fields, which by the way are really getting worn down for the past 20 years, then we'll go back into the, pit, I guess, again, and try to bring it up again to the town to see if we can get a field. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, for those of you who don't know, our athletic programs utilize Groveland Fields and West Newbury Fields quite a bit. That's because when you have baseball, we have one single baseball field, and they go there. We don't have space for lacrosse. 113 is the practice football field, so you don't necessarily want to be driving down 113 and have a lacrosse ball end up through your windshield. So the answer to the question, we've actually had quite a few preliminary conversations about, especially after the acquisition of that property, about what we might be able to do. And we've hashed around all sorts of ideas for what types of fields. We think we might be able to do some type of a multi-purpose field. And Haverhill Stadium has this, Linfield has it, where it's a baseball field that's all turf, but in the fall season you could use it as for field hockey, soccer, practice football as well, and in the spring they could use it for lacrosse, and that would alleviate, I think, the burden on your town's fields, although we still would probably go to Groveland and West Newbury from time to time and ask for utilization of the fields, though not nearly as much. But that is, so obviously we're very conscious of the youth sports that are in our area, and we know, more than anything, we want kids to be up and active and engaged in these, so whatever we can do to maximize our space is what we're looking to do. Again, we've had just very preliminary conversations. I don't even know when that ends up coming to.
We have a sense of, what those fields are that we showed Bill, in that diagram. So, but right now, I think the big ad, and in terms of flexibility, is putting that artificial turf field in. And then, when we have, the idea is that lacrosse obviously would be able to play their off-season with soccer, football. There's a scheduling exercise that obviously is going to happen. You've got boys, girls, JV. So we're not going to obviate the need for having to go and use some of the pipe stay fields, but I think we're going to take a big chunk of the burden off. And as Dr. B was saying, we're looking at potentially on the ball field that's now in place. It was shown there that there's an overlay field in the outfield that again could be used, as practice, whether that becomes turf or whether that becomes or artificial turf versus grass, that's up for discussion. It's money. And right now, we're pretty conscious about that. The original 155 estimate that we had didn't contemplate having a baseball field on site at that point in time. So, that's an add that we're hopeful is going to get absorbed into that overall cost number. We didn't have the property at that time, but now with the advent of bringing the property in and giving us a little bit more flexibility on that location up front, we were able to get that additional field on site.
You might be able to have a better understanding. Do you think it will be before the April town meeting or it will be after? And the only reason I'm asking that question is to get a better understanding from the Parks and Rec, from our end. When do we start pushing, if we have to push, for another field in West Newbury?
Right. So right now the number of fields that we showed, is going to go through the town vote. Right. That's what we're pricing right now. And one artificial turf field and the baseball field currently is being estimated as a natural turf field with an overlay.
To Mr. Dunn's comment, North Andover High School, the contractor came in 3 months early, $8 million below. They have probably some of the most fantastic athletic fields anywhere, actually some better than some of the colleges. I have coffee with a bunch of retirees, and we're all on fixed incomes. I'm the only one voting in favor of this. But one of the practical questions that come from these gentlemen is, what do we get for 120 million? What do we get for 130 million? What do we get for 140 million? And you don't honestly think I'm going to vote for 150 million. That's where they are. I'm still working on them. To Brad, I'll make this short because we had a lengthy discussion about the middle school gym. If we'd gone, and this is water over the dam we'd gone through a 6 through 12 model, would we have a middle school gym?
Well, I guess we have a gym that, to a certain extent, when we talk about middle school, high school gym, there's a square footage amount in terms of the MSBA guidelines that we talked about, which is the 12,000 square feet. And that's consistent, whether it's a middle school, high school, it's driven by the number of students that you have in the building and the enrollment projections that the district signed up to. And so with that, we're actually, as I forget who spoke to it earlier, we're actually a little bit over to make that gym work better than just a strict 12,000 square foot guideline. So, when we look at the student population here, and we look at the program use for that space, we think that it works. Does it resolve the fact that, we have essentially a middle school gym now, a high school gym now, and then kind of that Ox three-quarter gym? We're going to be down overall in terms of the number of gyms, but I think we're going to have better, more flexible space. We believe that it can accommodate both the middle school and the high school PE and athletics. We're going to have to work hard at scheduling in terms of being able to accommodate all of youth sports. Even if we built, Dick, as you know, another gym, right? Youth sports programs and high school, middle school athletics would grow, and we'd still have a demand for that even if we built another one.
All right, I have two Marine buddies that are a little concerned about all the windows on the lower level. They're thinking in terms of security, that people no longer have to go inside the building to hurt people. They can actually do it on the outside. So I promised them that I would pose that as a question tonight.
Yep, great question. So we actually met with the police chiefs from all three towns, and we talked with them just to get an idea of how did they want to, as police, law enforcement, safety, public safety officials, how do they want to address the safety equation? Because ultimately this is a public building, it's a school building, it's not a prison, and it's how far down the road do we march on that. So we spent a lot of time talking about that, and what we decided is that we have to look at hardening certain areas. And one of the things I think you're alluding to is we see this glass on the front of the building, and what does that mean? So we've really looked at different glazing techniques and ways that we can put glass technologies come a long way to go and put we're specifying school guard glass at those locations to be able to go and have something where it doesn't mean that it's bulletproof glass, but what it does is if somebody were to come in with that type of intent and try and shoot their way in, the glass doesn't come apart. You can shoot it, you can come at it with a sledgehammer, but what it does is buying time, right? And it allows, public safety officials to get there along with, and I won't get into that for the obvious reasons, all of the other safety measures that we're taking. So we're really looking at trying to harden those areas. But, does that mean that it's an impenetrable fortress? No, because that's not what we're building here. But we certainly are considering safety, and we're certainly including that as part of the design.
Okay. My last suggestion is I've had an opportunity to talk to some math teachers. They're not terribly excited about not having their own room. For example, and you talked about graphing, a math teacher that ends up in a room that all they see is dictionaries and a rosette thesaurus, and they're working on graphing, they can't pull that off their wall and bring it down. And I'm wondering if that's worth rethinking so that a particular department, and I'm thinking of math and science, I wouldn't want anybody that didn't know what they were doing in a science room. Those two in particular could be very, very fixed. English and history, I think that's an easy match for much more flexibility. But I see very little flexibility with math and with science.
So I can address this a little bit. The building is not designed to force the idea that teachers don't own their own classrooms. In fact, quite the contrary. What we did is a schedule analysis of the courses that both schools are offering right now and designed enough spaces to accommodate those courses under the daily schedule that currently exists. What we have done is design the building so that there's flexibility for the district to assign classrooms as it sees fit from an operational point of view, but the design will not force math teachers to teach in an English room or to teach in a science room. There will be enough spaces based on the coursework that you're offering right now for teachers to be in a fairly dedicated space.
And it also takes into account the growth that may potentially happen. So if you experience growth, then yes, you might have some sharing of classrooms. I think all my years of my first 3 years of teaching, I was traveling around from room to room. So that oftentimes will happen, but it allows for that. But I think what Jason said is absolutely correct. With our projected enrollment and with our current, we could put the current high school and middle school in there, and teachers would be in their own spaces. But as time goes on, as the population grows, the building could hold it. It would just be, there would be more sharing of spaces. So I believe, I'm going to just say yes or no on this one. August 2022? Hey, all right. August 2022 is the estimated completion date. Go ahead.
Hi, Chris Manny from Merrimack. Thank you, everyone, for coming and helping educate everyone. So what I heard was an estimated cost of repair of the high school of $70 million. Is that correct?
Yes, so right now the estimate is 73.2 is what the estimate is, yeah.
So what would it be, what's the estimate for the middle school? And the reason why I'm asking is total cost structure, right? So we get 2 new schools basically in this one project. We wouldn't have to repair either one of those, but there's obviously time of money considerations. But secondarily, the contingency plan of moving high schoolers to the middle school is frightening. I mean, you have 2 more grades that would be going into an already building that's falling apart. So I'll leave that to you guys.
Sure, we actually had this discussion today. On the original plans, it always said the high school repair only 73.2 million, and then you would have to come back and address the middle school. The middle school, 41.7 million. Was that a repair? And that was a repair. So it was the 73.2, sorry. I know, these numbers always get, 70.2? Okay, and then additional 41.7 million.
So,
sorry, 10 years, 10 years.
So we're basically prepaying 10 years of repairs, getting a $95 million school and 2 schools instead of paying 115 over the next 10 years. So we're basically prepaying, getting 2 new schools rather than just repairing old, outdated assets. Is that accurate, or am I missing something?
The one part, that the assumption there is that the buildings fail. So it's possible, although the independent people say do not think it is, that the buildings could continue with no issues whatsoever. But yes, the likelihood of it failing, that what you just said would be correct.
And earlier, correct me once again if I'm wrong, I believe the words that the independent review said was imminent?
Yes, imminent failure. That was in 2015. So it was likely imminent failure.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just wondering, there's a lot of information presented tonight that's really valuable, and I know it's not being broadcast on the local TV channels, but it's being recorded. Can we put this recording on the local?
Yes, that's actually, they're recording it, so it will be broadcast in all 3 towns there.
By the end of the week. In West Newbury, I was told we're going to get a link sent to us, probably by tomorrow, then we'll be forwarding to our cable people, and then it'll be up hopefully by tomorrow night. If not, it'll be Saturday morning.
Can we send an email, like a townwide email out as to when it's going to be broadcast?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Can that link be put on the prsd.org site? So that each town doesn't have to fish for it?
Yeah, it'll be, absolutely, we'll put it up on the school building website, we'll tweet it out, absolutely.
Thanks.
So, I'm just trying to find, I've got the report from March 23rd, 2015, the existing conditions report. That's where I can, it talks about the terminal units, the HVAC, plumbing. I'm trying to find the exact language, but while I'm doing that, go ahead.
I was wondering, you said 30 years on the loan. Is it possible to extend the loan for a longer time? Maybe 50 years to spread it out for a longer period of time?
So that's not my area of expertise. But 30 is the length.
Have you tried?
Oh wait, we have a debate. Yeah, we will explore every option. We'll explore every single option, absolutely.
Because interest rate is really low right now.
Right.
It seems like a good time to maybe lock in at a longer.
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
Just to follow up on what we just spoke about, are you going to add Facebook to this list of communication? Because there's a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication. I'm sure people have seen it on Facebook. And this project is way too important to let that go for these three communities. So is there any plan to add that or add more communication? Because I think we really need to blast this out there and really get the facts out there.
Sure, so we're working with we're working on a whole entire website. Facebook, so as school employees, we don't have a person that oversees social media. So for us to be able to go and put everything up on Facebook all the time, we just don't have a person to do that. But if we can get stuff on the website, I know we have I believe someone on the school committee oversees Ms. Trotter. She oversees, there she is. She oversees the Facebook page for the Pentucket. So we can get her that information and she can have her presence out there for the school committee. I think that would be fine. We want to get the actual information that's truthful out to people so they understand what they're getting.
Hi there, I'm Nancy from West Newbury. My question is actually for Representative Tarr and Senator Tarr and Representative Mira. I actually was interested if you could share with us your perspective, because you have a wider view of the other schools in your district, and also from where you are in Beacon Hill, you're aware of what other districts across the state, the facilities that they have, and whether anyone else is in a similar situation. Could you comment from your perspective on, one, how dire the situation is here for Pentucket when you've heard tonight some pretty grim descriptions of the facilities for our students? And two, could you also comment for us on how important, how imperative you think that this vote is in the spring, just, for the academic strength of our schools here?
Okay, so first of all, I'm wondering if you have any easy questions. Let me just say that I would never, number one, from my own perspective, I would never tell local officials or people in the community what they should do. That's a decision that has to be made locally, and that's why discussions like this tonight are so incredibly important, so that we all have the facts, we all understand the ramifications of decisions, and people do things that in the end they know they're doing with a clear conscience about the decision that's being made. That being said, I also would not substitute my judgment for the experts. I would suggest that when I hear words like we've heard tonight about things that are in danger of imminent failure, that raises an incredible red flag about the condition of the existing facilities. Obviously, this has been a situation that has been developing for a long period of time. And these buildings, or this one in particular that I'm familiar with more than the other, is the high school as opposed to the middle school. And that offers, for me, a lot of concern about the condition of the building and about its ability to perform the functions for which it's intended. So obviously, we have been, since we reformed the MSBA a number of years ago, we have seen communities all across our region taking advantage of the new program. And by that I mean specifically under the old MSBA program, and Brad and others can I'm sure confirm this, there was a very long time that you had to wait before you got reimbursement. And so communities often found themselves having to take out interim financing arrangements, like anticipation notes of bonds, to be able to go forward with the project. The goal of reforming the program at MSBA was to make sure that communities got timely reimbursement and weren't put in that position of a lag between when you got approved and when you actually got financing. In addition to that, one of the things that's happened with MSBA, with the reforms that we've made over the last several years, is what I would consider a depolitization. So things are placed on a list in an objective manner, based on their condition, and based on their condition versus other schools in their cohort. And by telling you that, I'm trying to emphasize the fact that you got accepted is significant evidence of the need that exists here. We no longer have the situation where people would jockey for position based on a number of factors that weren't objective. We aren't there anymore. The last thing I'll say before I turn over the microphone to Representative Mira is that your legislative delegation is here to follow the dictates of your officials and your votes. And when you decide, if you decide to move forward, then we will use every ounce of our ability to make sure that your reimbursement is maximized, that you get the facilities that folks locally believe you deserve, because oftentimes, and you've heard it referred to tonight, there is give and take between MSBA and a school district about what should be included and what should not. I personally have been involved in a number of those decisions to advocate for the school district to be able to get the things that it believes it needs to educate kids in a proper way. And I would do that in this instance as well. So the decision has got to be yours. But when it is made, the legislative delegation will do everything within its power to make sure that what you express that you want comes to fruition. I'll stop short there and turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Justin, for an excellent explanation of what we are up against with this project. It's hard to add to what has already been said, except that I will say that a few years ago, we were taken on a tour of the facility by then Superintendent Jeffrey Mulqueen, and he took us through the locker rooms, restrooms, hallways, and kitchen areas, and all of these areas date way back to the 1950s. And they were doing a good job of keeping them running. They were slapping paint on things, putting down new flooring in certain areas, but it's still a building that dates back to the 1950s. And could they be refurbished? Yes. Could they be rebuilt? Yes, they could. But he also showed us some certain structural issues with the building that really raised a lot of flags and raised a lot of concerns. And as someone else mentioned earlier today, trying to fix those is kind of a Band-Aid. We could spend a lot of time and money fixing those things, and at the end of the day, we will still have a building that was built in the 1950s. It's an outdated building that raises a lot of concerns. And I have two sons that went through Pentucket, got an excellent education. We moved to this area for that reason, so that my kids would go through Pentucket. This was over 10 years ago. But that building has served us very, very well over the years, and I think it's time to take a big picture view of the whole thing. We have a chance to replace both buildings with one, do it all in one shot at a time when we know what the reimbursements will be. And that's pretty much a sure thing. We don't say guaranteed, but it is pretty much a sure thing with a 40% reimbursement at this point. But like I said, it's hard to add to what has already been said, except that we have an opportunity now to address it all, and I think Justin has done an excellent job presenting us with all the facts that we need to make a decision. And as Senator Tarr said, we're going to support whatever decision the three towns make, and we just want to make sure you have all the information necessary to make that decision. And thank you all, everyone, for coming out tonight to hear all sides. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? All right, so listen, this is not the end. In February, when we get those numbers, I will go out and I will start going around from community to community. If there's an event, if Board of Selectmen, I know, have always offered and have been open and letting me come and speak, I will go to those meetings. We need to have more community meetings like this. I intend to do that at all three towns so we can go and have more conversations about what it is that's happening. And again, the ultimate thing is that you understand what the information is, so when you decide to vote, you know what you're voting for and the implications of it. Finally, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming out this Thursday night. It really means a lot to me that we're all able to come together and show that unity that I know the Pentucket community is all about. I hope we're able to continue to do this. And for everyone here, I'll just continue to give you everything I got in this position. I'll take care of our children, I'll take care of our staff, and hope that you do the same for us out in the community the way you did for me. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.